Hello everyone, and welcome to the 216th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring the characters and themes of Batman Returns. Some of you may be wondering why I've chosen to cover the sequel to a film I haven't yet covered, and you'd be right to. However, I have a good reason for skipping over the first Burton Batman film. I thought it was about time that I got to covering yet another iteration of the Joker, that being the one portrayed by Jack Nicholson in the aforementioned 1989 Batman film. However, when I was checking to see if there were any novels or comic books I needed to read to give you all the full picture on this version of the character, I discovered that there's going to be a book coming out this fall that will expand on the Joker's story, Batman Revolution, which itself is a sequel to a novel released last year titled Batman Resurrection. So I figured it would be best if I waited till Revolution's release before I covered Jack Napier. So in lieu of covering Jack this month, I decided I'd go with the next best thing, his villainous successors that we find in Batman Returns. And considering that Batman Returns might just be my favorite superhero movie of all time, that seemed more than appropriate to me. But I've said enough already, so without further ado, let's begin. In this film, there are three characters who operate according to varying degrees of villainy, and each of them with a unique brand of it at that. Max Shrek, Selina Kyle, and Oswald Cobblepot. Max Shrek offers us a glimpse of a type of evil that should be quite familiar to most, if not all of you. A self-made industrialist who made himself by engaging in illicit activity, Max is a self-centered, power-hungry, and money-hungry individual who's as unethical as he is ambitious. Sporting a hairdo that would make a mad scientist jealous, a condescending and matter-of-fact tone, eccentric apparel, and self-assured, measured mannerisms, Max appears to us as every bit the ruthless tycoon that he truly is on the inside. And in manifesting his forceful persona, we're treated to some rather heinous examples of what a man in his position who isn't afraid to stoop low is willing to do to achieve his goals. When we're first introduced to Max, we see him hosting a meeting with the mayor of Gotham, and here he expresses his desire to begin constructing a power plant he's designed, imploring the mayor to use his powers to help Max's company jumpstart things by bypassing all the red tape that's typically required to begin such an endeavor. Max attempts to convince the mayor to do so by offering him his vision for the future of Gotham's electricity grid, stating that though Gotham currently has a surplus of energy that's growing yearly as the mayor kindly points out, the growth the city is experiencing in this sector is but a pittance. And to ensure Gotham's energy needs are met with an exponential surplus in the future, should the time ever come when such a thing is needed, a new plant should be built that would be capable of building up their reserves, which honestly isn't a bad plan. Unfortunately, it actually is a bad plan, as we learn later on that Max's power plant wasn't really a power plant that would produce electricity, but rather one that would siphon off power from the Gotham electrical grid, so it could be stored by Max's company and be used in any way he wished, which probably would have been his leverage to use against the various power companies in Gotham to put a stranglehold on the market and enrich himself exponentially. And not only that, but a legacy of wealth that he can leave to his son Chip once he's dead and buried. Not seeing the sense in Max's plan, the mayor refuses to acquiesce to his wishes, but that in itself causes more problems than it solves, as Max is not a man who can suffer being denied anything that he wants, no matter how big or how small. With this intended plot in mind, we're given a pretty fantastic idea of who Max Shrek is, a man who believes that power is everything, but that money buys power. And to that end, Max proves himself to be a person who is wholly unconcerned with the wants and needs of his fellow man. But his plans for this power plant is only scratching the surface. When Max is captured by the Penguin, we learn that Max has his hand in all sorts of deplorable business practices, like dumping toxic waste into Gotham's waterways produced by his supposedly clean textile plant, his ownership of half the fire traps in Gotham City, which is a term used to refer to buildings that lack certain fire safety measures, like fire escapes, that would make them horrifically dangerous should a fire break out in any of them, and worst of all, his murder of, or order to murder his former partner. So not only is Max a conniving businessman who's attempting to use underhanded business tactics to provide more wealth for himself and secure his son's future, but he's a conniving businessman who's more than willing to pollute his city and destroy its environment, endanger his customers and tenants to save a few bucks, and murder a person for the sake of what we can assume is financial gain. So as a representation of unabashed and illicit corporate greed, Max Shrek is a model poster boy. Now Max is clearly a crook, but he's a crook with a brain, as no one gets to the kind of position Max is in coming from nothing without being intelligent. And aside from the fact that he's a successful businessman who's likely seen many a plot and scheme through to completion over the years, who also has a perfectly good one in the works, he's also a man who knows what makes people tick, and how to influence their thoughts and perceptions of a man who they would rightfully despise if they knew his true character. The best examples we're given of this are found in Max's status as a well-liked public figure, and in the actions he takes when dealing with said public. When Max is delivering a speech to a crowd of Gothamites, he shows us how knowledgeable he is when it comes to manipulating people into believing that he's a good person, with appeals to their sense of kinship by stating that he's just some poor schmo who got lucky, and that if he could, he'd be handing out world peace on Christmas instead of expensive baubles, when in reality, he'd rather fleece everybody present than give them anything. But the greatest testament to his intelligence, and how well Max has managed to fool the public, can be found in his efforts to elevate the Penguin to mayor of Gotham. When the mayor refuses to go along with Max's plans for his power plant, Max threatens to have the mayor recalled so he can find one who will. But as the mayor points out, Max doesn't have a candidate, so his threat is meaningless. After he's abducted by the Penguin though, the downtrodden man who wants to return to the surface after a life lived in the sewers, that all changes. The Penguin snatches Max to ask for his help in making this dream a reality, using an ample amount of blackmail to help convince Max to do so. But ever the clever businessman, Max manages to turn his kidnapping and attempted coercion into a deal that will benefit both his plans and Oswald's. Filling the Penguin's head with grand visions of respect and prestige, Max offers to make him the next mayor of Gotham, and after he accepts, we see how stellar Max's image is as far as the public goes. After making his entrance from the sewers as the hero who saved the current mayor's child, not only do the people accept this brutish and gruesome man as their next potential mayor, but they embrace him as their champion whose familiarity with the dredges of Gotham will make him into the savior of the people that will right every wrong that was allowed to fester by the current mayor. Of course, a well-managed and well-funded campaign also helped the Penguin's image, as money does have the ability to make even the darkest beast into an angel. But that just gives all the more credit to Max for being a man who knows how best to use his resources when enacting his plans. I am the light of this city, and I am its mean, twisted soul. This is something that Max says to Bruce at one point that perfectly embodies what his character is. A man who on the outside represents everything that the citizens of Gotham idolize, the wealthy elite philanthropists who use their wealth and position to care for their people, and on the inside, a criminal who will commit whatever dark deed necessary to further his ambitions. And as I said a while ago, the evil of Max Shrek is one that should unfortunately be all too familiar to most of us. Now, as terrible as most of Max's actions and plans are, the greatest amount of evil acts that occur in this story are doled out by the Penguin and his gang, and Max must be faulted for the role he played in enabling many of the Penguin's crimes in this story, committed and attempted. And while the mayhem and destruction the Penguin caused can be attributed to Max in an indirect way, there's another person we should talk about before we get to the Penguin, who suffered more direct harm from the illustrious Max Shrek, Miss Selina Kyle. A crime Max committed that I haven't mentioned until now was his attempted murder of Selina, his secretary. Selina initially appears to us as a frazzled, forgetful, and naive girl who has poor self-esteem and anxiety, a woman who's as overlooked at her job as she is outside of it. Selina's nights seem to consist of her returning home to listen to her answering machine for disapproving messages from her mother, rejections from men, and ads telling her that she must buy certain products if she wants to keep a man. Afterwards taking comfort in her many craft projects and hobbies that seem to be quite childlike in nature, which isn't a bad thing at all. But for Selina, and many women like her, she lives in a world where she's constantly reminded that she's missing something, that to truly be happy, she needs to wear the right clothes, perfume, and makeup, and behave in a way people expect a woman to, so she can pursue life's supposedly singular joy for a woman her age, finding a husband, no matter how untrue that might be. It's no wonder then that after she foolishly reveals to Max that she knows of his plot, and she experiences a near-death experience at his hands, that Selina decides to take charge of her life and lash out at a world that she doesn't quite seem to fit into, that expects her to be someone she's not. You wanted sexy and glamorous? Well, meet Catwoman, the twisted personification of everything that the world expects a woman like Selina to be, with her sleek black BDSM costume, accompanying whip, and a sensual demeanor that would lure all but the most stalwart of men into her metal claws. But it's not just her dissatisfaction with society that drives Selina to make this change. It's the fact that she's thus far felt helpless in this world, and is looking to become a woman who depends on nobody for anything. After Max's meeting with Mayor Jenkins, Selina is accosted by the Penguin's Red Triangle gang at the tree lighting ceremony, and when she's confronted with a thug holding a taser in her face, she's terrified. But after being saved by Batman, Selina makes the choice to take this man's taser with her so she might defend herself with it in the future, being sure to give it a little test on the unconscious goon for good measure before she takes off. Unfortunately, when it came time for Selina to defend herself in a life-or-death situation, she wasn't able to do so, and making it so that could never happen again factored heavily into her decision to become Catwoman. a notion that is exemplified for us in her first vigilant act in this new persona, saving a woman from a mugger, as after she saves her and the woman thanks her, Selina instead berates her for being so helpless and incapable of defending herself, an aspect of her former self that she absolutely despises. And now that Selina has become the antithesis of what she once was, there was only one thing on her mind now: revenge. The following day, after returning to work to give Max a bit of a scare, Selina decides to break into Max's department store and trash the place before blowing it up, which then results in her encountering Batman, who she fights with, and afterwards declares to be a roadblock on her path towards revenge that must be eliminated. And so after playing a bit of cat and bird with a lustful penguin, she makes an alliance with him so they might accomplish this feat together, convincing the penguin that killing Batman would make him into a martyr and that painting him as a criminal would be much better for their goals. Selina and the penguin devise a plan to frame Batman by kidnapping the Ice Princess, the woman slated to light the tree in Gotham's tree lighting ceremony, making it look as if Batman had done so by leaving a blood-stained batarang in her dressing room. And after the penguin alters their plan a tad, and instead pushes the Ice Queen off a rooftop to paint Batman as a murderer, Selina expresses her displeasure to the penguin before she rejects his advances, and nearly loses her life as he retaliates in turn. There is more to Selina's story, but now it's time that we got to talking about the most standout evildoer in this story, our dearest Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin. Oswald was born into the wealthy Cobblepot family, stunted and deformed, and apparently quite violent from the get-go, if his snatching of a cat into the cage his parents placed him in is any indicator. Unable to bear the stain on their family's honor and the terror their newborn son caused them, Oswald's parents chose to abandon him in Gotham City Central Park near the zoo, and rather than simply leaving his carriage there for someone to discover, they chose to do the unthinkable and toss their son over a bridge and into a small stream. After floating for a while, the young Oswald finally ended up in Arctic World, the section of the zoo designated for Arctic creatures, and here is where Oswald met his new family, a group of emperor penguins that decided to take him in as one of their own. While Oswald would live much of his life in these waterways, at some point he must have yearned for something more, so he decided to join the Red Triangle Circus when they were in town one day, as one of their signature freaks, so he might get a taste of the world above. But becoming dissatisfied with this horrific lifestyle, Oswald eventually ran away from the circus to return to his watery home, but not before taking with him a few of his fellow freaks to expand his ersatz family. It's implied that at some point Oswald chose to pay a visit to his parents and exact his revenge on them for their abandoning him. But otherwise, for the next several years, Oswald would remain a denizen of the deep, who likely sent his goons to periodically raid the surface world for supplies, before he finally decided that it was high time he got to experience everything he had missed out on by living in the sewers, a decision that we see playing out at the beginning of this film, when he sends his gang to terrorize Gotham's tree lighting ceremony in carnivalistic style. Now, when we're first introduced to Oswald, we're shown a man who has been molded entirely by the circumstances he'd been forced into due to his parents' abandonment of him. Short, squat, hook-nosed, sporting 2 rows of pointed and blackened teeth, and long, thin, greasy hair, Oswald appears every bit the damp-dwelling goblin that he is on the inside, which seems a more appropriate designation to me despite the fact that he's referred to as the Penguin because of his appearance. Why I think this is more appropriate is because of the way the Penguin speaks and acts. When we first see him interacting with Max, he's snide and cruel with a twisted sense of humor, and he's also sickeningly exuberant throughout his interaction with him, his depraved smile and intense gaze being hallmarks of his character that are often present on his gruesome visage whenever we encounter him. However, it's not so much the way he speaks that makes him reminiscent of a goblin, it's the way he acts. Because he was raised by animals, the Penguin is quite animalistic in nature, with breathy grunts and snarls being common occurrences whenever he's interacting with others, and his propensity to eat raw fish only enhances his already animal-like persona. And while these aspects of his character serve to amplify the terror he instills within us, they also accentuate something quite sad about Oswald: his lack of humanity. Earlier, when I said Oswald has been molded entirely by his abandonment, I meant it, as Oswald is the personification of everything that could possibly go wrong with a person when they're forced into a situation like this. Though Oswald is highly intelligent, as a man who's capable of organizing a gang, creating bizarre gadgets out of umbrellas, and enacting complex and successful plans, is anything but stupid, he's also entirely without empathy, prone to bouts of childlike rage, and completely consumed by his insecurities and lack of human connection. And Oswald having these characteristics makes sense when you consider the world he was raised in. Oswald, until he joined the circus, had no real connection with other human beings, no love from a parent or friends to spend time with, and no role models that he could look to show him how to mature into a properly adjusted adult. Because of this, along with his rearing by animals, Oswald has no real inkling of what it means to interact with other human beings. Oswald wants the love and respect of other people, but doesn't know what it means to love or to respect. He wants relationships with women, but he doesn't know what it means to express that desire beyond acting on his most basic primal urges with the various women we see him interacting with. And most importantly, he wants to be seen as a human being, but he has no idea what that means and has no regard whatsoever for human life. So of course Oswald sends his gang out into the world to terrorize the citizens of Gotham, hoping to earn respect and admiration through fear. Of course he makes unwanted vulgar passes at women to express his sexual desire. Of course he's prone to temper tantrums, as a man like Oswald will in many respects always be a child. And of course he's a man who would bite the nose of another and throw away the lives of countless people in order to satisfy his own impulses and needs, as Oswald cannot even begin to identify with his fellow man, for he is barely a man himself. All of who Oswald is, and what he desires to achieve in this film, culminates in a dastardly plot of genocidal proportions once his bid for mayor is undone by the interference of Batman, with Oswald declaring that just as he, the firstborn son of an elite family, was cast aside, so too will the firstborn sons of the wealthy socialites of Gotham be cast aside. And when that plan is thwarted, Oswald resorts to the unthinkable, unleashing death and destruction via his army of rocket-clad penguins that would have killed an estimated 100,000 people if he hadn't been stopped by Batman. A truly horrifying action from a man whose entire existence had been mired in horror. When we reach this end for the Penguin though, and we examine all the information we learned about him, as well as what we learned about Max and Selina, we find that their stories and their endings leave us with a few things to ponder. Now there are two themes baked into this film that I came across when researching this story that are particularly important when attempting to understand the moral lessons this film offers us. That being that duality is central to the stories of each of the main characters in this film, and that all three villainous figures here reflect dark and twisted aspects of Bruce Wayne and Batman. Much like Batman, who often experiences a heap of internal conflict as he tries to reconcile the life he lives by day with the one he lives by night, Max, Selina, and Oswald also struggle mightily with who they are or what they want out of life. Max's dual nature as benevolent businessman and ruthless tycoon is counterproductive when it comes to achieving his goals. He wants wealth, safety, and security for himself and his son, but he goes about obtaining these things in such an unscrupulous way that he courts risk and utter ruin with every move he makes. A man so caught up with getting everything he wants by whatever means necessary that he fails to see how his actions only harm his ambitions, and his choice to live this double life and constantly flirt with his darker tendencies is what ends up seeing him undone by a woman whose life he nearly destroyed. Max, as far as his connection to Bruce goes, is the kind of man Bruce would have been had he not had solid moral foundations that guide him in the business world. Where Bruce is the kind-natured playboy on the outside, who is truly a good person seeking to do good in the world on the inside, Max is the charitable and loving magnate on the outside, but a representation of the worst kind of corporate greed on the inside. A version of Bruce that could have very well been if his life had been ruled by other factors, rather than the legacy of loving parents and a kindly father figure in Alfred. Selina was a woman who was caught between being who she actually was and what the world expected of her. A woman whose constant disappointment with the life she lived and what she thought she needed in it left her wholly unsatisfied with her existence and utterly alone. When she becomes Catwoman, these aspects of her are amplified to such a severe degree that she ends up becoming the corrupted avatar of the standards and expectations that were forced upon her by society. And though we often see her struggling with what she's now become and feel she must do, her trauma has unfortunately made her unable to do so. Her desire to exact her revenge against Max for attempting to murder her is more than understandable, as seeking to serve up death to a man who's either murdered someone or ordered someone to be murdered and attempted to murder someone else could have been appropriate, especially when you consider what Selina says to Bruce when they're debating what to do with Max, as she points out that men with money and power like Max unfortunately often don't get what's coming to them because of said money and power. But her desire for revenge against Max and the world that had wronged her totally destroyed the person she had once been, any hope that she might reclaim that person in the future, and her prospects for a normal life with a man she had fallen in love with. And ultimately, the war raging within Selina between her former self and Catwoman is lost to the creature that only lives to satisfy its desire for revenge. Selina is a representation of what Batman might have been had Bruce dedicated his crime fighting to punishing others rather than ridding his city of crime for the good of its citizens. After the murder of his parents, Bruce could have easily become a man so enmeshed in pain and hatred that he dedicated his life to revenge. But just as he became a well-respected businessman with the help of those who influenced his upbringing, so too did he transform his pain into something that would benefit others, in the process saving him from a life chasing acts of revenge that would only leave him feeling progressively emptier as he carved a path through the underworld of Gotham. The Penguin, Oswald Cobblepot, was caught between two different worlds, the animal one he grew up in and the human one he actually belonged to. Who Oswald became was in no way his fault. He was abandoned by the people who were supposed to love and care for him due to the deformities and traits he was born with. And while it described Oswald as a goblin in both appearance and personality, in reality, his appearance is not what makes him a monster, for there isn't a person alive whose appearance makes them a monster. It only enhances the monstrous aspects of his character, all of which only manifested because he was cast aside and left for dead by his parents. Bruce was born into the same type of family as Oswald, and as Max points out, if things had gone differently, perhaps he and Oswald would have become acquainted with one another. And with that in mind, it's easy to see how Oswald is who Bruce might have been had he once again not been afforded the opportunity to be surrounded by loving and caring people who worked to ensure he became the best version of himself, whereas Oswald only knew the comforts of his penguins and the dark waters of a home that no child should have ever been placed in. So that is more or less the lessons this story imparts upon us and the intricacies of the evildoers found within. And when summing up what we've seen here, we find three distinct brands of evil. The evil of a man who will do whatever it takes to fill his pockets. The evil of a woman so caught up in revenge that she betrays herself and who she could have been. And a grimy, furtive, animalistic, and childlike evil that was born from the mistreatment of a child who only deserved to be loved, but one who was transformed into a monstrosity with carnival style and the ferocity of Earth's wildest creatures. But within each of these people, we can also find misguided virtues. The ambitions of a man who wanted a better life for himself and his son. The heartache of a woman addled by her society who only wished to find peace, happiness, and security. And last, but not least, the desires of a man scorned by those who should have cared for him more than anyone else in the world. A man scorned by those who should have cared for him more than anyone else in the world, who only desired to know what it means to be human, to live without pain and suffering in the world he was torn from. And when all is said and done, what we're presented with here in this film are three people who in one way or another were touched or influenced by the cold hand of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Batman Returns? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially our Dark Lord channel members, Elijah Kai the Eccentric VA, and some dude on Earth. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.